And so we're very proud that the National Guard and the Marines are on the streets defending the ICE agents, and they will continue to do that.
And order.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth facing questions from Congress this week on the Trump administration's decision to deploy troops here in Los Angeles. About 700 Marines and more than 4,000 National Guard have been deployed at a cost of about $134 million. William Deverell is a professor of history at USC's Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, and he wrote about what we can learn from what he calls a history of overreaction to peaceful protests in California. Professor, it is great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
You wrote this opinion piece in which you basically said that Trump's federalizing of the California Guard to quell a supposed insurrection was less about restoring peace and more about showmanship.
That's how I see it. It seemed reflexive to me. The president bypassed the usual protocols about the commitment of and deployment of National Guard soldiers, men and women, and jumped on it by putting out 2,000 National Guards under federal authority. And that seemed to me an overreach and presumptive.
It is rare that civil disturbances necessitate military intervention. In fact, in 1878, a law was passed to prevent the misuse of military powers in civilian affairs. Doesn't mean it didn't keep happening, though. Just a few years later, you wrote about that railroad strike.
Yeah, in the spring of 1894, a railroad strike which began in the outskirts of Chicago at a Pullman Palace car manufacturing facility spread across the nation and paralyzed rail traffic across the nation. And we saw the results of that profoundly in California. Rail traffic was shut down for several weeks, even longer. Depots were occupied by striking rail workers who had been unionized and organized in secret. So this took the state by surprise. And the governor at the time, Governor Markham, deployed the National Guard to try to break up the strike and to get the trains running again. The lack of train service was very difficult, of course, for the political economy of the state. But what the governor didn't recognize was how complicated the deployment of National Guard troops in the middle of this very tense issue across the state, how complicated and the unintended consequences of that. So it seemed to me a historical parallel.
Yeah, the troops didn't want to shoot their friends and neighbors and brothers-in-law.
Yeah, literally. Many of these National Guardsmen, and it was men at that time, are called up from the very community where the railroad strikes are taking place, at railroad depots and across rail yards up and down the state. And so those ties of community and family and identity and neighborliness created exceedingly difficult issues regarding the deployment and the use of those guardsmen.
Yeah, and the public opinion backfired on the action. You know, we have seen military forces used in other civil disturbances in the century since, obviously in the civil rights era. But we've also seen it here in LA, including the Watch protests of 1965, where 30 people were killed, 2/3 by the police or by the guards. We also saw them in the Rodney King protests of 1992. Is what we're seeing right now, is that the same?
I don't think it's the same. I think there are parallels in some respects. There is upheaval in our streets. There is violence, which I do not support. But back then, with those other events you mentioned, there was coordination and collaboration and cooperation between state authorities and the federal authorities, and there were plans. This is different in my view. This was, at least until the recent past, seemingly a contained issue that our local authorities, our local police authorities who are charged with domestic peace could handle with themselves, the LAPD, the sheriff's office. And then immediately that changes with the deployment of federalized National Guardsmen and women. And now, apparently, the deployment of nearly 1,000 United States Marines. That's very different.
And we've seen things go sideways when people train for war enter civilian spaces. Kent State, of course, it was immortalized in the song by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
For dead in Ohio.
Yeah, that's the tragic, centerpiece of how things can go awry. I think we need to acknowledge how tense and chaotic these issues are, and better planning and issues about command and control regarding various deployments of this kind of peacekeeper or that kind of peacekeeper. I'm not going to say these aren't easy, or these are easy, but these are complicated. And it seems to me that the escalation of the tension, which after all, in some respects is aimed precisely at federal authorities, it's going to further escalate if you commit federalized troops.
Before I let you go, Professor, you mentioned in your op-ed piece that Mark Twain had written that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. How will history see this moment, do you think?
The easy answer for a pointy-headed historian like myself is say it's way too soon to know. However, the pattern of this kind of gamesmanship and get tough opportunism looks to be a real part of this administration's activities. And I suspect in my heart of hearts and my head of heads that history will not be kind to this.
William Deverell is a professor at USC. We thank you for your time and your piece.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage. And click the subscribe button here. You can also download our app and watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.